Hi everyone, I'm Matt Reynvaan, winemaker at Reynvaan Family Vineyards. Today I am up at the winery looking out at the Foothills in the Sun Vineyard, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the 2023 Syrahs. So hopefully you guys will enjoy. The first wine will be the In the Hills, which is Syrah co-fermented with Viognier. 2023 as a vintage really was, I think a great vintage. I think we're both in the farming and in the cellar, some really interesting things happening. With regards to the farming up here at Foothills, I think the biggest thing we try to do is manage manage the canopy growth, because we do have so much of more of a soil that kind of promotes a lot of canopy growth, that we have to kind of watch how much exposure the fruit gets, but also protecting it during the really hot times. So as we go throughout the year, we like to kind of expose the fruit at just the right time to make sure that we don't overcook the fruit, because it can be a super warm site. But it also brings, great diurnal shifts, which is the temperature rising from the day into the nighttime, that remains this amazing, gets this amazing acid, natural acidity, basically. So diving into the In the Hills here, I think this is a wine that showcases really this awesome element of the natural characteristics of the property over here. There's this wild mint that grows that's I pick up in the wine a lot. There's a natural, I don't know if it's from that sort of soil, but there's a briny characteristic to it, almost like a saltiness, and there's a richness to it, the cured meats and the mushrooms, and there's all these kind of crazy notes that I think are very important for a Syrah. Viognier definitely from this is the almost like a dried tangerine, a little bit of the white flower. In terms of like making the wine, I try not to intervene a lot with the wine. I like to showcase what the grapes are, just the purity of them, and not necessarily get too heavy-handed, or lean into the wines too much. I like to just kind of let the grapes show what they are and guide them through their fermentation. So let's see what we got here. Definitely great tannic structure, almost a note of kind of like candied violets, lots of almost like a gamey characteristic, but also there's that balance of that with the cured meats that brings a really interesting element to the wine. There is definitely a how would you say, there's the acidity in here brings like a nice brightness to the wine, but it's not an acidic wine. It's just brings a balance to what we can achieve with the fruits and what the natural acidity is. So it makes it very like approachable early, but it also has the ability to age for a long time. Love the aromatic on this. Super interesting throughout the somms that I've met. Really love this wine for the kind of like interesting, like distinct, where they kind of can reference these other places in the world that make really interesting Syrahs, but they always love the fact that it's from Walla Walla, which is still an amazing place to grow Syrahs, but not as well known as like you would think of as like Côte Rôtie or something. But when they do blind tastings and people are like, well, that's got to be a Côte Rôtie, and they're like, actually it's from this little vineyard in Walla Walla by Reynvaan Family Vineyards. They're like, what? That's crazy. And so I love what we're able to achieve from this particular site with the Syrah Viognier co-ferment. Lots of dried lavender, savory notes, but also that brightness coming back to that is super interesting. Really, really cool wine. Just smell this forever. Lots of graphite, lots of iron, really interesting stuff going on here. The amount of Viognier, it's a different type of Viognier with the co-ferment than what, let's say, what the In the Rocks is, we're going to look at in a minute. Brings more of a peppery, but kind of like tangerine, ripe, not really ripe, more like dried tangerine together. Just makes a super, super exciting, interesting wine. Okay, moving on to the In the Rocks Syrah, which again will be Syrah co-fermented with Viognier. The Rocks was kind of, in terms of the year, there was a lot of kind of early growth that made it a little bit challenging to get everything in its place. There was a lot of hands-on work with our crew, just working their tails off to get everything in the wires and perfectly trained so we could create these kind of wines. The fruit down there was super balanced, super intense, but also had a kind of elegant quality to them, which is great for the wine, where you can have this kind of intensity, but also have a really interesting elegance to it. So for the In the Rocks here, Viognier again pops a little bit more with its the style of the Viognier down there is more of a richness, a more opulent style of Viognier, and I can pick that up in the co-ferment more. And I love the fact that when a Viognier and a Syrah, kind of mix together, and the way that they co-ferment together, it makes it so interesting, and it was just like meant to be. And I gotta say that, learning what I've learned of like people and what they do in Côte Rôtie, and bringing that here to our terroir in Walla Walla, and really showcasing what we can do from this terroir, makes it super interesting. And then when we taste the wines next to, maybe the wines that, I've been inspired by, in the past, seeing the similarities, but also the differences, but that when both parties are looking at the wines, this is a great Syrah. This is a wine that can be world class, but we have our characteristics. Like, we will never make a Côte Rôtie, and Côte Rôtie will never make a Walla Walla Syrah, but they're both on the same level playing field in terms of how people view great Syrahs, especially ones that are co-fermented with Viognier. I have to say, like Viognier, sometimes I do this in the cellar where I go and I look for individual barrels that are by themselves that I know are just like maybe a high percentage of Viognier, Syrah, and it's so fun to just kind of get like a reference point and just be excited about this style of wine, because I typically try to put in a little bit more of, when I do the co-ferments, a little bit higher percentage of Viognier, and then blend in the other Syrahs, where it's taking, a couple barrels here, a couple barrels here, bringing that Viognier percentage down against the Syrah, and making it into, like, the final wine usually ends up between like 3 and 6%, maybe 7% Viognier with co-fermenting, together. But when you have these high percentages, like that rich, almost like the white flowers for sure, just like that very floral, almost Hawaiian characteristic with it, but that's too much for when you do it with a Syrah. But when you have that as a starting point, and then bring in these other more powerful Syrahs that kind of mask the Viognier a little bit, but still it has so much floral characteristic that it lifts, they both lift each other very well. So I just think that's super interesting, and the nectarine, kind of the characteristic of that really comes through, but you have to find that right balance. And again, with our wines, it's always about balance, and that's what we're really trying to achieve here. And I think we've done that very well with this style here, the In the Rocks. Super cool. Like saltiness again. You have the kind of like warmth of like the, creme brulee, where you got that kind of sweetness, you know, and almost like a toasted caramel kind of thing. It really makes it what you were looking for in this kind of Syrah Viognier blend here. Lots of red fruit, crushed raspberry, crushed cherry. Again, balanced with the like cured meats, smoked meats. You know, that's very interesting for a Syrah and for a wine like this. It's what I try to achieve with that. Okay. Oof, that's good. Okay. Moving on now to the Contender. So this is another co-fermentation, but with Marsanne, which is, you know, Marsanne is kind of what people drink when it's like a Northern Rhone white blend. It's usually Marsanne, Roussanne. We chose Marsanne because we thought that would be a really interesting thing with the Syrah. And we've done that since the very first vintage, 2007 vintage. I say this a lot, but this is so Rhone-like in terms of like referencing that point. So those places that you have where there's that great minerality, there's a richness to it, there's a concentration to it, and there's a great tension in the wine that I don't think, you know, it's one of those things where you, like I said before, we're not going to make a Rhone wine, but you have these reference points that I think are very important. But we're showcasing our terroir, which is super important throughout the wine world, because like it's very distinct. You know, that you taste a wine that's from this valley and from particularly our vineyard, that you can reference and know that you're tasting a Reynvaan wine from this terroir. That's super important in the wine world, because you want to have an identity and you want to have a style, and you want people to, when they try it, say, this reminds me of something, but this is something very unique in itself. And I think we've achieved that pretty well here with the Contender and with all of the wines. But I like the fact that we're one of the few people who do a Syrah Marsanne, because I think it's very stylistically very interesting and very unique. So it's pretty cool to be able to create a wine like that. Man, this is one that it's almost like a I don't know if we have sushi fans here, but it's like sea urchin, which is not for everyone. I know my notes are a little crazy sometimes, but honestly, when I smell that, just that kind of like umami, savory, salty characteristic is super interesting. And the wine is fantastically dark. I mean, it's super dark for 2023. The wines, you know, are always a little bit darker, I think, from our particular terroir, but this particular wine, the Contender, is one that really has got this just an intensity of color that I love. Again, wow, the graphite, the iron, the kind of like smoked brisket, Texas barbecue kind of thing. It's like super interesting. This one's, it's funny, I get a lot of the olive tapenade, kind of the green and black olive tapenade from the Foothills, but with this one, I'm really picking up the green tapenade. And you know, honestly, I was tasting with a friend of mine down in LA, and we were sitting in his house, and he was kind of like trying to understand. He's like, you know, what is it that why do I pick this up? And I said, what other wines, what other Syrahs do you have that could be interesting that we could kind of compare? You know, and look at if that characteristic is in that wine too, you know, from totally different terroir. So he opened up a cellar, and he's like, you know, I have some California Syrahs. And I was like, I said, how generous do you want to be with your, you know, opening the wine? And he's like, well, as generous as you want, Matt. And I was like, okay. So we went and he pulled out an Albin, a 2003 Albin Seymour's. And I said, I guarantee that this wine, you will find the same thing you find in the Reynvaan, this olive tapenade, this green olive tapenade. And we opened it up, and he's just like, holy shit. He doesn't curse a lot. He was like, holy shit, I can't not believe that this is, you know, what you said. And then I said, not only that, like, do you have any green olives in the, you know, in the fridge? You know, and he was like, yeah, I have some, you know, like martinis or whatever. So I opened it up and put it and had him smell it. And he was just like blown away that he was able to not only like capture that in the wine, but then directly from the green olive was able to like, oh my God, this is really like what we're smelling here. And so it was kind of like fun to show people, you know, that had that whole like synergy of like, hey, this is a great Syrah, you know, and we all have these kind of similar characteristics, but we're all from our own terroir. So Albin tasted the way it did, which is an exceptional wine. And then we tasted, you know, a Reynvaan that was an exceptional wine. And they had similar things, but they are from these different terroirs. So very interesting stuff. And I think that's fun to do throughout when you're tasting these wines. So anyway, back to the Contender. Just a really super interesting wine. Definitely picking up that green olive tapenade, and one that, if I'm right about, it's going to age for a long, long time and just be super interesting with all of the layers upon that we were able to achieve for this wine. Good. Okay, moving now to the 100% here. This is the Foothills Reserve. Gap to the old vineyard out here, sorry. Oh my goodness. This wine is seriously just got everything, like, you know, it's like, honestly, I bring this up a lot of times, like some of the most influential wines, you know, that I've been able to try would be like the Noël Versailles, Cornas, those Thierry Allemands, where they're just wines that just you're just blown away with, that people can, you know, create this kind of wine from just grapes and the soil and the terroir. And I find, like, what I'm so fortunate about is that I'm so thankful, really, is that we are able to create a wine like this that has certain characteristics of those Cornas wines from the hillside vineyard we have here in Walla Walla. And I know I say that a lot, but it's true, because it's like, it's pretty remarkable that we were able to plant a vineyard that probably by the terroir handbook wouldn't exactly have been the perfect, you know, place to grow Syrah. But what we have achieved here and bring out these old world characteristics from this hillside vineyard here in Walla Walla, you know, is super, super cool. And the fact that when we show people what it is and what we're able to achieve with it, I think people are like, wow, that is really, really amazing that you're able to coax out those kind of characteristics from a vineyard like this, because we have all these other aspects of terroir that's not, you know, the soil, not the, you know, all these other things. It's the wind patterns, it's the diurnal shifts. We're able to get that acidity that we're not able to get in the same way down in the Rocks vineyard. And we're able to make a wine that has a pure essence of, you know, what Syrah should be. And each of these wines has their own individual personalities, but I think Foothills Reserve is something that is one that is very interesting to me, very interesting to a lot of people, and super, super, super worldly, I guess is the term I'm going for. So lots of black truffle, lots of venison, gamey characteristics, again with the pepper, the wild mint. There's this awesome tension in the wine. Dark plum, super savory, but also with that acid that you get up here is very refined. There's more of a brooding characteristic in terms of like what the wine is, but it also has this kind of like freshness to it because of this acid that happens naturally, you know, which is not always the case for certain vineyards. But this is one that we have beautiful natural acidity. Just like for me, a seared Wagyu, you know, beef just kind of waved over, just perfect. Kind of the combination of that savory, fatty, just kind of like pure iron. So complex. Like, I just keep going back to the nose because it's just like achieving this, you know, from the 2023 vintage is just super exciting for me. You know, I absolutely love what has been done in a year that was, honestly, we have a series of really great vintages, and I think in 2023 it's elevated even more, you know, with what it's doing. I could sit here and drink that all day. But moving on here to the 23 Stonessnce. Again, 100%, totally different terroir in terms of the rocky, ancient riverbeds where it's just those kind of boulders that, not boulders, but larger rocks that kind of the rolled basalt, that creates this very interesting minerality in the wine. And people who don't know about the soil, it's kind of, if you know Chateauneuf du Pape, they have these rounded rocks that just they take in the heat, they radiate it back into the canopy and ripen it. But then we have these big diurnal shifts where it gets cooler at night, that we're able to kind of preserve what acid we can down there with the cooler nights. But then it has this richness from the heat that's ripening at the same time when it's cooling down. It's a very unique terroir, and it's one of the few places in the world that has this kind of terroir, and it makes it very interesting and distinct. And like when you try these wines, from Reynvaan, from the area down there, like it's very distinct. But I think one of the things that we do differently is that we don't try to bang it over the head about, oh, this is this kind of like funkiness or whatever. It's like you want to find the balance of that, and that's what I think we have achieved with the style in which we do it. There's a certain warmth to this wine that reminds me a lot of the kind of Hermitage style of wines, where it's got just a very welcoming, right? But it's a lot less oak that we use here. For the most part, I didn't use any new oak. It was a lot of neutral pungence, which is very much in the way I'd like to showcase the terroir. I don't want to mask it with too much new oak, so I think I use like maybe one barrel, a lot of neutral pungence. I try to use stems in the wine, for each of the wines, because I think it's very much like it brings in you can get a great fermentation in terms of the circulation, but you also get a peppery note from the stems depending on when you pick them, and when we always taste them. People think we're crazy, but we go out and taste the stems and say, okay, are these ripe enough to put into the batch, or are we going to do an all berry fermentation? I think when you get the right stems and use the correct amount, which I'm not going to share with everyone because it's a secret, but we put stems in there on top of other berries, other all berries, and find out the percentage we want. And I always like to play around with the percentages that we do. Sometimes it might be 10%, sometimes it might be 40%, sometimes it might be, maybe higher, who knows? But with this particular wine, I find that smaller amounts of stem inclusion, and more neutral oak showcases the terroir perfectly and creates a wine that is super interesting, very worldly, and one that when other winemakers from around the world taste it, they just think this is a great wine. This is one that can just be poured anywhere, and people will be like, I don't know where this is from. Hopefully they start saying Walla Walla. That's that much of a recognition, but this can be held up in the same kind of regard as the great Syrahs of the world, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. Lots of leather, lots of iron, lots of blue fruits. Again, sandalwood is one that I've picked up that I just think is very interesting, and a telltale sign of a great Syrah. Super bloody, but I don't want to freak you out with my notes, but bloody is one that where it's that iron and just kind of that richness to it, and the tension in it, and the powerful tannins, but also the integrated fine tannins really make this a super complex and super refined wine. Super dense wine, super warm. Again, pork fat, pork rillette. I mean, I remember when I was in France, and I was my lunch was always a pork rillette, and a baguette was it just takes me right to it, and it's just that's one of those things where wine evokes so much of a memory of a place, and when I smell that, it just brings it, to a I mean, I'm transported to Bordeaux, but that smell, to pick it up in the wine that we do here in Walla Walla, it's such a cool thing. And one of the great exciting things about wine is that it does that. So anyway, I get way too excited about these wines, but I really just, I want to say thank you to all the people who support us and taste and drink our wines and share our wines. And I really hope that we get to see you here coming out to the winery. These wines are going to be bottled next May and going to be released in the November of 2025. And I just hope that you get a chance to come over and visit us in this November, try them in barrel and see how they've evolved. But I mean, I am super excited about the 2023 vintage, and I really look forward to sharing these with you. And thank you again for joining me here at the Foothills Vineyard. All the best.